Welcome in to another edition of the All Things Bama podcast, powered by BamaCentral.com, your Sports Illustrated home for all Alabama news and information. I'm your host, Tyler Martin. Glad you guys are here for another week. Those who have chosen to listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and now YouTube. This is our third episode. We've actually videoed and been able to post on here, and hope you guys are enjoying that. Feel free to comment. Feel free to just comment on any one of the guests, what we're doing, what if our takes are wrong, if they're bad, whatever. We can take the criticism. But no, alongside me is Bama Central staff writer Joey Blackwell, and then one of our interns at Bama Central, Clayton Connick. Glad you guys are here. Joey, I know you're pumped. Baseball season starts this weekend. This is going to be posted Friday morning, and baseball season gets underway Friday afternoon. Basketball on Wednesday night. We'll got a big win over Mississippi State. But glad you guys are both on here.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much for having us. Yeah, like you said, it's spring sports are in full swing. Softball started last weekend. Basketball season is kind of wrapping up its regular season. And then we got baseball starting. It's a good time to be an Alabama fan in the spring, and all these sports starting back. And just thank you once again for having me on. It's been a while.
Yeah, happy to be here. It's a lot to look forward to for Alabama athletics.
Yeah, guys, so let's go get into basketball, what we saw Wednesday night, and then moving into Saturday's matchup against Kentucky, it felt like Alabama just played Kentucky yesterday, but it was really at the beginning of this month. So it was a quick turnaround with the season series there. But Alabama wins 80-75 over Mississippi State. And, if you would have told me going into this game, Keon Ellis doesn't hit a shot, Jaden Shackelford doesn't make a three, I would say Alabama probably would have lost this game, right? But the play of Charles Bediako, J.D. Davison, Darius Miles really was huge in this game. Alabama, and everybody just needs to come to the expectation when they go into a game that, guess what? Alabama's just not an efficient three-point shooting team. Yes, they shoot a lot of threes, but they don't make a lot of threes, right? And that's kind of like been the knock on Alabama, right, all season. And when you have casual fans who just turn on the game, they're like, okay, Nate Oates' system, they're going to chunk up a lot of threes. They should be better at that. Well, guess what? This team just isn't. They've got to find other ways to win. And I thought they did that last night against Mississippi State. And really, the most fiery moment of the night, right? Nate Oates gets his second tech, within about a couple minutes of each other, and he gets ejected, tossed. Mississippi State goes on a run, and then Alabama answers with an 18-2 run to really take control and win that game. Joey, we'll start with you. Main takeaways over the last Wednesday night, and then the last two games before that, where Alabama's won really three in a row and really turning it up a notch as tournament time draws near.
Oh, we're barely 5 minutes in this podcast, and you're already throwing fogs under the bus. But no, it's good to see Alabama, get back-to-back wins. It seems like it's been actually 3 wins in a row now. I think you're absolutely right though. With Keon Ellis, if you told me before the game that Keon Ellis is going to shoot a goose egg, and that Quinterly is going to be the leading scorer, a guy that hasn't exactly been hot lately. Though typically I would say, well, it looks like Alabama's going to lose this game, but it did not. Quinterly was on fire. He hit 3 threes on the night. Bediako had a career high of 15 points. He also had even more impressive tied a career high with 6 blocks. So a great night from him. We're starting to see J.D. Davison come around. Nate was talking last week about, or at least before the game, talking about how he's really starting to be more comfortable, and with that comfortability comes aggressiveness. So he's kind of to start coming of age. He only had 7 points, but he did have 10 rebounds and had 3 steals on the night. So those steals and those rebounds show the effort that he has, including a very important put back off of a Quinterly missed 3 that was kind of late in the game that really helped out. And when Natos had those 2 technicals, it was actually 44 seconds apart that he got those 2 techs. And Mississippi State had that little run there right afterwards that looked like they were about to just pull away from Alabama, but that 18-2 run really sealed the deal. And just a really hard fought, to be cliche, a hard fought win for Alabama.
Yeah, it definitely was. And I'd like to highlight James Rojas and Darius Miles off the bench for Alabama. James Rojas had the highest plus minus on the team, which, watching the game, it's not really something you could have predicted or really noticed. But he was on the floor when that 18-2 run began. He made a corner 3 to get it started. And he played just 12 minutes and had a plus minus of plus 12. So, big minutes there from James Rojas. And then Darius Miles kind of capped off the run with that monster dunk where he jumped from looked like the free throw line, like on the wing. But yeah, that was crazy and really got the crowd. That was the loudest moment of the night. The crowd was in it already because of Oates' ejection, but then that Miles dunk there was insane. So those energy plays from those two off the bench was really big for Alabama in the win.
And
I will say that, Tyler, you, me, and Clayton, we've all seen very loud moments inside Coleman Coliseum over the years, but I've never seen the crowd get so loud that the players on the court can't hear the whistles of the officials. And after that Miles dunk, obviously Mississippi State frantically called a timeout to try to end that run, which ultimately succeeded. But all the players had made it 3/4 of the way down the court before play was stopped just because they couldn't hear the officials' whistles. So really loud environment in Coleman Coliseum.
And Alabama fans took a lot of heat on Twitter before the game. I don't know if you posted a photo, Joey. I know I saw a fellow beat reporter from another site post one like 10 minutes before the game, just talking about the crowd. And, 6 o'clock tip-offs are always hard in Tuscaloosa. They're always hard, right? Because you've got people in Birmingham who really just got off work at 5, takes an hour to get to Tuscaloosa and really get in your seat. There. And yes, people kind of filtered in as the game went on. But I would say, there was 8,000, between 8,000, 9,000 there last night. And to me, like, I know it got a lot of knock about the empty seats. I get that. But think about this. When Alabama has this new arena that's only going to hold a little over 10,000, what you saw last night and what you felt last night is going to be magnified 10 times in a smaller arena where, the noise is just echoing out different places and going all over the place. That's what people got to realize too. As loud as it was last night, when they build that new arena, and it's not going to seem like that, right? So Alabama fans might be getting dragged on Twitter, because, it wasn't a sellout or whatever. But it was loud. And when the new arena comes, it's just going to be that times 10.
Well, you're going to have this, let's hypothetically say we had the same capacity last night as the new arena. Let's just say that hypothetically. The thing about it is that also the fans are more spread out in that in the new arena, they're going to be closer to the court on all 4 sides. And you're going to have the fans more densely packed together with a lower roof and the walls not far as away. Or not as far away. So when you combine all of that together, a crowd that's already incredibly loud the acoustics are just going to kind of mesh a lot better with the way the new stadium is set up. And I mean, Alabama's student section can already make an impact, even in their little thin little strip right there on the end, on one of the baselines. But if you have them wrapped around 3/4 of the court, like Nate Oates and Greg Byrne have said are going to happen, that really has potential to. Auburn, give Auburn credit. They have one of the best student sections in the country, and the way that the arena is designed, albeit small, the way it's designed is very effective to elicit loud reactions from the student section. And when Alabama has that, it's just going to be the same deal.
Exactly. And really what I wanted to get into with you guys about is the fact that, and I'm glad somebody on Alabama Central wrote about it. I'm glad Chris had a little column up today about it. But as it was happening and Alabama went on that big run after Nate's ejection, I was thinking that this is going to be either the turning point or a moment that it's not going to go down well. You know what I mean? Like it could go 2 directions. And to me, like this is the defining moment in this season. Why? Even though Alabama, for the large majority of this SEC schedule, has not shot the ball well, over the last 2.5 weeks, what I have seen, Clayton and Joey, I've seen a team that is trying their darndest to do the things that matter, right? Like they're trying to dive on the floor for loose balls. They're really trying their hardest to do what matters and not focus on just, okay, shots aren't dropping, when naturally you're going to get lethargic when, you're not seeing the ball go through the net. But they're trying to do the things that Nate Oates practices. And I think, last night they were rewarded for that, right? I mean, then, after a huge slump, Rojas hits the 3, they come back down. I mean, they start getting some baskets in transition. I just think at the end of the day, I mean, this team is what it is, and they're going to be defined by doing the blue collar things. And they're starting to do that, right? Like they're beating the teams they should beat now. And after Kentucky on this schedule, guys, we talked about it last week with Tony and Blake, that they really should win their last 4 games. South Carolina, Vanderbilt, Texas A&M, LSU. LSU on the road is tricky, and Vandy in Memorial Gym's always tricky. But those are games that Alabama should win after Saturday against Kentucky in Rupp Arena. So I would just like to hear from you guys' perspective on it. Do you also agree that this is really the turning point for Alabama as the SEC tournament draws near?
Yeah, I think last night was a big turning point. After Nate Oates' ejection, it took everybody else, and it kind of seemed early on this year, Nate Oates was in press conferences saying like we need leadership on this team. Like us coaches can't do every part of it. And then obviously last night he wasn't there to do it for the last 8 minutes. And the team found a way to, go on that 18-2 run to get the win. So I think that's a big turning point for Alabama. And Javon Quinterly and Charles Bediako were in the press conference last night, and they were saying how they had their coaches back. Bediako said he fights for us, we fight for him. I think that kind of culture, like you mentioned, Tyler, the blue collar culture, like the way they're playing is really hard. Really a lot of effort on the floor. And even though shots may not fall, I think, their mindset is what's going to carry them through. And so, some more leadership throughout is going to be big for Alabama.
And this is how Nate Oates' teams operate, or at least how he wants them to operate. He wants to, even if the shots fall, he wants the effort to be there. And I think that we're finally seeing the players kind of realize that it's like, hey, even if shots aren't falling, we can still win basketball games as long as we put forth the effort on the defensive end of the court. So I think that's, a lot of people were also concerned earlier this year about how they thought the Alabama's peak basketball might have been December when they beat Gonzaga and Houston back to back, of course, soon after having that really awful slump in January. But I think that even though this team, the games are a lot closer, I think the effort that they're showing really is slowly but surely incrementally improving as we head into March. And as Nate Oates always says, it doesn't matter really what you do during the season, as long as you're playing your best basketball in March. And the SEC tournament is another opportunity for Alabama to improve its seeding. These last couple of weeks are an opportunity for that seeding to improve as well. And so as long as you really just impress in the SEC tournament and get a pretty high seed in there, as long you can keep that momentum heading into March with what they're doing right now.
Yeah, and I looked at the last projected bracket for the SEC tournament, and where Alabama's at right now, they have the 5th seed, so they'd be playing the winner of Missouri and Ole Miss, which again, that's whoever Alabama plays there, that's a winnable game. You're talking about, even though Missouri beat Alabama in Columbia earlier in the year, you're talking about 2 cellar dwellers in the SEC. And then if Alabama gets past one of those teams, they would play Arkansas. And Alabama, and I mean, yeah, since Nate Oates has gotten here to Alabama, right, that's kind of been like a rivalry with Eric Musselman, and we saw that last Saturday in a very, very tight ball game. But again, that's a game that Alabama could win down in Tampa, right? And then you'd be sitting there more than likely playing Auburn in the semifinals. And I'll tell you what, I know Auburn's beat Alabama twice already. I don't think Auburn wants to see Alabama a third time. I don't think they want to at all. So it's just in Alabama, I think the highest it can probably improve its NCAA tournament seeding line is probably about a 4. It's a 5 right now. Getting a 6, in my opinion, might be better because, one, you avoid playing the 1 seed in the Sweet 16, right? You wouldn't have to face a 1 seed until the Elite 8. So I think that's pretty big as well, because you coming out of the 6-11, you'd be playing, a 3 seed, and is your highest possible seed you could face in the second round. So I think a 6 seed is maybe where Alabama wants to be, because right now in Joe Lunardi's latest bracketology, it'd have them playing Gonzaga in the second round, or excuse me, in the Sweet 16. And I don't know if that game gets played again. I don't know if Alabama, shoots as well as it did the first time back in December.
No, I don't think so. I think that Alabama had the element of surprise last time. And that's not a discredit to Alabama. Alabama's obviously a really good team. But I think they had the element of surprise sneaking into the battle in Seattle. Gonzaga, obviously thought this is basically a home game for us. This is a team that we went undefeated last year, that made it to the national championship game. And, I think that a little lowly team like Alabama, while they did obviously play very well last year, they're still Alabama. They don't really have the history that Gonzaga does. They're not really a blue blood program. And I think them being able to sneak up on them was a huge advantage. But no doubt the Bulldogs won't underestimate Alabama again. And that's another reason why we've seen Alabama kind of slip this year. Alabama last season was kind of able to slip up on a lot of teams, and people didn't really take them seriously until, halfway through the SEC season. And this year they don't have that advantage.
Yeah, they're definitely. Yeah, go ahead, Clayton.
I was gonna say, yeah, that's a really good point. They began the season with a target on their back in the SEC. Now that target's kind of transferred to Auburn as they went on that big winning streak. But yeah, Alabama began with the target on their back, winning the regular season and the SEC tournament title last year.
Yeah, I'm curious also, and there's a lot of basketball to be played, right? We're still 2.5 weeks out from the SEC tournament. And so Alabama's still got 5 regular season games left. But before we get into maybe a preview of the matchup with Kentucky, Clayton, I'll start with you first. Charles Bediako, since the second half of the Auburn game, when him and Quinterly, basically both those guys erased that 16-point deficit early in that second half to Auburn, got it to 2. He has been playing some of the best basketball of the season. I mean, in my opinion, when I watch him play, like, he's gotten tougher, he's gotten stronger. There's really been a difference in Charles Bediako's game. And, he could honestly be next year a version of what Walker Kessler is at Auburn. Because Walker Kessler, he didn't get much playing time at North Carolina. He was still really lanky. What Auburn has done with his body is very impressive, and what he's turned into as a rim defender is nobody expected this out of him at all. And they expected him to be a good player, but not what Walker Kessler is now. Obviously, maybe the most important player in the SEC. Right there with Oscar Tshiebwe of Kentucky. But I think, guys, Charles Bediako could be that next year for Alabama. Maybe not at the same level of, 15, 10, and 5, but he can do something really close. And I saw it last night with his ability to really defend the rim against Mississippi State's bigs.
Yeah, I think that's a good. I think he could get to that level, like you mentioned, of Walker Kessler. But Nate Oates made a good point last night that, this is the first time Bediako's gone through a season like this. Like, it's a long season, especially in the SEC. Every game is super important, and every game is, there's talented players on the opposing team as well. But the expectations for Bediako were sky high coming into the season, just because of his size and because of, the stars by his name in the recruiting cycle. But Nate Oates said that they've been giving him a couple more breaks. So Nate Oates said he had his legs back under him a little more this week, which I think was important because, it's his first time going through a super long season like this. And, he's been a starter most of the year. And, he had a career high last night with 15 points and even that and one finished dunk on the alley-oop. So that was an exciting moment. And, he's seeming a lot more comfortable on the floor, especially on the defensive end.
I think one of the keys for Bediako in improving in next year is that all he needs to do, if he could just put on a little bit of weight, get some more muscle mass in between, this next offseason, I think he'd be a much more potent driver to the back and driving to the basket. I think he'd also be able to back in a little bit better, which is something he doesn't have right now. He has the speed for a tall guy. He's actually relatively quick. But I think what he's missing is that power behind him. And so I think that would be a huge factor if he could gain a little bit more weight heading in the next season. If he can build a body more like Walker Kessler has, maybe not in height, but at least in strength, I think that he could really be a force to be reckoned with next year, because he's already grown so much since the start of this season. And then you look at where he is now. Just imagine what he'll be, another 8 months from now.
Shoot, I know I mentioned next year and kind of what he could be on this team, and because Alabama's never really had a post player like him. But, I'm interested to see what he does over the next 2.5, 3 weeks, right? Throughout the end of this regular season, because on Saturday, he's got a matchup again with Oscar Tshiebwe, who is definitely the country's best rebounder. And what I saw from that first Alabama-Kentucky game, Alabama had a great defensive performance, which was wasted by, the 3 for 30 from 3 that everybody wants to talk about. Alabama held Kentucky to 66 points. And, if Alabama ends up shooting their season average from 3, they more likely win that game. But before Tshiebwe really went off in the second half, grabbing all those rebounds, where he finished, I think, with 15 or 16 that night, Bediako held his ground. Through the first 20, 25 minutes of that game, Bediako really held his ground. And that, to me, is going to be a really pivotal matchup to watch on Saturday. I'm also interested in what's going on with Kentucky's point guard, or shooting guard. Say he really plays the 2, with Xavier Wheeler playing the point. With Ty Washington, is he healthy enough to go on Saturday? Because as we all know, he hit some big shots in Coleman Coliseum a couple Saturdays ago. And if he can't go, that kind of levels the playing field to me in my mind. And Kentucky's a different animal at home at Rupp Arena. They're coming off a shellacking against Tennessee. And, and here's the thing. They shot awful against Tennessee, which in turn, they're probably going to shoot lights out against Alabama. That's just how it goes in basketball sometimes. But kind of what do you guys think about Alabama's prospects of actually going into Rupp Arena and beating this loaded Kentucky squad on Saturday?
I think it begins on the defensive end. Alabama held Kentucky to just 66 points when they were in Coleman Coliseum, and that was impressive from the Crimson Tide's defense. Neither team shot the ball well. Like you mentioned, everybody wanted to talk about the 3 of 30 from three from Alabama, and the lack of offensive production. But I think a positive from that game was the defense for Alabama. Holding Shibwe to just 10, I believe. So yeah.
I think it comes down to a couple of things. First and foremost, I think it depends on how Kentucky responds to their loss to Tennessee. If they continue, if they're still not feeling good on Saturday, then obviously Alabama can take advantage of that and exploit it. But if it's the opposite case, if Kentucky's like, okay, we need to bounce back. We've already beaten Alabama once. Let's beat them again. That's also a factor. And then from Alabama's perspective, I think that for them, they're going to be working on shooting from deep heading into this Kentucky game just because of what happened last time. And obviously, that they bounced back, against Arkansas with a really solid, night from three. I believe it was Shackelford that had 8 on the night or somewhere around that number.
He had 8.
Yeah. And so I think that if they can try to tap into that and replicate that, it could be a game that we see Alabama, kind of pull off an upset. But at the same time, I think it's highly, dependent on both those factors on top of what Clayton said about the defensive play.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I've got KenPom pulled up right here, kind of looking at Kentucky's numbers. 21-5 on the year, second in the SEC. They're 6th in adjusted offense efficiency, and they are 12th in defense. So they really do have the makings of a national championship type team, right? When you're top 15 in both adjusted offensive efficiency and adjusted defensive efficiency. Alabama, after beating Mississippi State last night, they're actually 15th in offensive efficiency and then 66 in adjusted defense efficiency. So definitely Alabama still needs a little work there. But yeah, for Alabama to go on the road and beat a Kentucky team, they're going to have to shoot some tough shots, right? Like Jaden Shackelford, he's kind of been a little puzzling to me this year. I get it, right? He's the leading scorer, but he goes out against Georgia, and I know Alabama lost that game, but he shot really, really well in that game. He has nights like that. He has nights like against Ole Miss, like you just mentioned, Joey, but then he has kind of clunkers here and there. So I think for Alabama to win, they've got to let their stars be stars, and their stars have got to deliver, right? I mean, Javon Quinterly, 21-8, if they can get that from him or even close to that again, him being that facilitator and really getting to the hole, and maybe even trying to get Shibwe in foul trouble, which is going to be really tough because he's such a good defender. But they're going to need Shackelford to have a really good game. And it's always interesting because when I'm watching Shackelford, it's like, the nights that he goes crazy, right? Like he did in Oxford, Athens, and some other points in the year against Gonzaga. The next game, he looks like his legs aren't underneath him. It looks like he's fatigued. And I think that's really an issue. And I've heard some, people on Alabama Twitter talk about it, and I think it's a good idea. They've really just got to, manage the minutes for Jaden Shackelford, because to me, as good a scorer he is, and I think he can take Alabama really, really far into March. But they've got to make sure he's getting the right kind of minutes. Like you mentioned with Bediako, Clayton, you look at he had a career high in points on Wednesday night. He also had a career high in minutes. 27 minutes was the most minutes Charles Bediako played. And that's actually good for this late in the year to really be playing these late minutes because, you're building that stamina, you're building that toughness to really endure that late in the year. So Jaden Shackelford to me really is got to be the difference maker on Saturday, because if Alabama wants to get that top 4, they're going to need a little bit of help, right? Because they're 2 games behind Arkansas right now. Arkansas still got to play Tennessee twice. They've got to play Kentucky. So Arkansas definitely has the toughest schedule. But getting a win against Kentucky would just be ginormous in the standings.
Yeah, me and Joey were actually talking about it last night. Alabama's guard room.
I was about to bring this exact same thing.
Yeah, Alabama's guard room is arguably the best in the country, with J.D. Davison, Keon Ellis, Jaden Shackelford, and Javon Quinterly. Those four, you know, but it seems like not all of them show up at the same time, you know? Like last night, Quinterly had 21, but Keon Ellis was 0 of 7 or 0 of 8 from the field. Like he didn't have a field goal. And then against Kentucky, Jaden Shackelford was 0 of 7. So it's just like if they could all play at the same time and produce at the same time, Alabama would be a much harder team to beat. But since it's like you get a no-show from at least one of the four, sometimes two of the four, it's hard for Alabama to overcome that sometimes.
And we saw that.
It's
Gonzaga and Baylor games as well. Like we saw those in some big moments for Alabama. The Houston game as well. Joey, what were you about to say? Because I want to get you on baseball before we get out of here.
I was going to say, it's like they made a deal with the devil. It's like the devil was like, you can have the best guard rooms in the country, but on any given night, only 2 out of the 3 will actually play well. It seems like that. It's like that same case every single game. One will do very, very well. One will be, okay, I'm going to get 11, 12 points. And the other one will throw up 5 or less points. Like it seems like that's just the case every single game.
And maybe with Alabama hitting its stride going into this Kentucky game, maybe this game against Kentucky is the game where all 3 of them really play well together and they really all 3 have that really stellar game because, Alabama's last really big game was against Kentucky. But I think of the game before that against Auburn when J.D. Davison didn't score any points. He looked kind of timid. And then really since that moment, he's been a different player, right? He's come alive the last week and a half. Maybe this is a game where J.D. Davison says, hey, this is a noon CBS game. The nation's watching. I'm going to amp up my play. I'm going to be aggressive. I'm going to attack the rim and really try to carry my team to a victory. Joey, baseball season, first pitch gets underway Friday at 3:00. Alabama, Xavier. Give us a rundown right now on what you expect from Coach Bo's squad in 2022.
Well, we have Alabama brings back a lot of experience in fielders. Their pitching, their bullpen, and their starting rotation kind of lacks that same experience, but they do return 6 starters on the field. The lineup has been incrementally improved this year. I think we're going to see a lot more power and a lot more extra base hits this year than we did last year. Alabama, of course, last season made it to an NCAA regional for the first time since 2014. I think this team can do it again. One of the issues, though, is, of course, their schedule, and that's always a problem in the SEC. Alabama, you have 10 SEC weekends, and Alabama plays 7. There are 8 teams in the top 25 in the preseason right now, and Alabama plays 7 of them. They play all 7, with the exception being Vanderbilt. So a very tough season. They also have a road trip, not this weekend, but next against the consensus number 1, Texas. So just a really, really tough schedule for them. But at the same time, like I said, they bring in a lot of really talented transfers. You have Tommy Seidel from Harvard, who's had some SEC experience, so at least playing against SEC teams, including Alabama, where he was one of their best players against the Crimson Tide. You have Dominic Tamez, who's kind of slated to take over from all-conference catcher Sam Prater. I got to see Tamez bat in person, and he was very impressive. And then you also have, on the mound, you have another transfer in Garrett McMillan, local guy from Tuscaloosa, played his first couple of seasons at Shelton State, then, was it as JUCO, transferred over. He's actually the opening day starter tomorrow on Friday, or I guess if you're listening to this podcast, it'll be today. So just a lot of excitement. We were talking about it before the podcast. Coach Bohannon is always relatively positive about this team heading into this season. But this year he's been incredibly positive. He's kind of said a couple of times that he could see this team hitting 60, 70 home runs this year. And while he will admit that Alabama's bullpen and their pitching doesn't have the experience he'd like to see, he said that there's not a lot of separation between his top 10 guys on his roster that could pitch, which if your talent is low, that could be a bad thing. But if the talent is high, that's really, really good. So we'll just have to wait and see. Obviously, we haven't seen these guys play in a game situation at all in the scrimmage, but it looks like this could be a team that will they host a regional? Not quite sure, but I think they could definitely get past a regional. I think this team could go a little bit deeper than last year and, hopefully turn some heads.
Okay, I'm going to give you one position player for Alabama and one pitcher that's going to define their season. Who's that position player and who's that pitcher?
Well, starting pitcher would be really hard to pick. I mean, I think you, because obviously you have McMillan, you have Antoine John. Yeah, I think Dylan Ray is slated to make a big impact after not being able to play much his first year. You have Landon Green and Brock Guffey, two experienced guys coming back. They're going to be pitching in the bullpen. If I had to pick one in particular, I really think that Garrett McMillan, based off of what he did, could be very impressive. And I think he's kind of, as Bo was talking about a couple of days ago, he's already kind of developed into a leader on the team. And then a position player, I think you kind of have to look at a guy like either Tommy Seidel, Jim Jarvis, or Dom Tamez. I think Tamez, like I said, has really shown a lot of skills. I mean, people forget this guy played at Arkansas his freshman season, and then after he transferred to McClellan, Arkansas, after he finished his sophomore season at McClellan, Arkansas wanted him to come back, and he decided he wanted to change the scenery and came to Alabama. So he has that talent to play for an Arkansas. So he's Alabama fans are very lucky to have him in Tuscaloosa. So I think, kind of those guys. And Jim Jarvis he's become a staple for this team, both with Webb Gems and in the lineup. I think Jim Jarvis will, he's a vocal leader on the team. He kind of co-founded the Good Vibe Tribe, GVT. So I think he has a huge impact, and the way he goes a lot, as we saw last season, kind of the team can potentially go as well.
Wow, Clayton, Joey, talked about all these transfers, talked about all these players, and he didn't mention Drew Williamson, didn't mention Clayton, didn't mention Owen Diodati. So, Alabama looks like they've got some depth this year. Clayton, do you have any expectations for Alabama baseball this year? Where do you kind of see this team at?
Yeah, I was gonna say that my one player, position player wise, was probably gonna be Zane Denton. He hits from both sides, and he's solid defender over there at third base, and he had one of the highest averages on the team batting last year. So yeah, Zane Denton, he's a constant producer for Alabama. At least he was last year. And I asked the guys today, Will Hamiter and Jim Jarvis. I asked them today, how did last year, seeing a regional, what did that give you? And they said it gave them confidence going into this year. Knowing what it took and knowing that they came up short of their goals last year, and they've got the culture this year. So I look for them to get past a regional this year. They may not be able to host one playing in the SEC West, like Joey said. It's insane how many ranked teams are in the SEC in baseball, like most other sports. But yeah, I look for this team to get past a regional because of the culture they have, and the incoming transfers along with the experience. I think it'll be a good mix for Alabama.
Hey, it was only 8 months ago that that Zane Denton was about 6-7 feet away from a walk-off home run to send Alabama to a winner-take-all game in the regional against NC State, who ended up going pretty far, but ultimately getting robbed in the College World Series last year. Guys, appreciate your time. I mean, we didn't even talk about football at all. And the only football item really this week was Derek Dooley. Alabama has just become an employer for former Tennessee coaches. They've had 3 of the last 4 outside of Philip Fulmer. So that's pretty exciting news on the football front as well. But yes, Joey, thank you so much for coming on here. Clayton, you as well, man. You guys provide some awesome insight. We hope to have you guys on here soon.
Thanks, Tyler.
Thank you so much, Tyler. Appreciate it.
Awesome. For Joey Blackwell, Clayton Connick, I am Tyler Martin. This has been the All Things Bama podcast.